Welcome back to Unqualified Opinions, and on today's video we'll be doing our Week 4 NFL Power Rankings, and I'm joined by Will Byerman and Paul Hires.
Really excited to see where we have Detroit this week, Marko.
And not a surprise to see who's at number 1.
All right, I'm Marko Yerkovich, and these are my Week 4 NFL Power Rankings. So first up, I'll start with my honorable mentions. I've got the San Francisco 49ers, who, despite a bevy of injuries, still beat the Giants, so I find it hard to truly remove them from this conversation. I've got the LA Rams, despite a close loss to Buffalo, kept things quite interesting towards the end with that comeback, so I've got them on honorable mentions still. I've got the Arizona Cardinals, who, despite a loss to a surprisingly competitive Detroit Lions team, I've still got them on here.
There it is.
They're still a good team, so I got the Cardinals. And the Raiders, weren't super competitive with the Patriots, but the Raiders are still 2-1. And if they can play some defense, they're a very solid team. So let's get into the top 10. At 10, I have the Tennessee Titans, a team who last week I had my honorable mentions. Another solid victory. They're 3-0, so they've earned their way into the top 10. Still closer than you'd like to see it. All of their games this year have been way too close. But with Derrick Henry taking the majority of the offensive, firepower, I think this Tennessee team can be pretty good. At 9, I have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I probably should have them higher just the way they performed, but I still have to keep them below the Saints, who are at 8 since they lost to them. Tampa Bay is really starting to fire on all cylinders, but I don't want to get too enthusiastic about Tampa Bay yet, considering their blowout win last week was against the Denver Broncos, who have been completely injury-riddled. So 8, I do have the Saints. Finally had to drop them a bit more. I dropped them 4 spots, losing to the Packers. And that wasn't just for losing to the Packers. Obviously, the back-to-back losses were a bit surprising. So the Raiders lost. I know there was some conversation with you guys that I didn't drop the Saints nearly far enough last week. So 7, I have the Steelers, who were up 2 spots after beating the Texans. It was pretty close, but they pulled it out. They're 3-0, great win. 6, I have the New England Patriots. I have them also up 2 spots after a blowout win against the Las Vegas Raiders. They looked convincing. They lead the league in rushing offense, and that doesn't look to be slowing down anytime soon. 5, I have the Buffalo Bills, despite a very, very close game, closer than it should have been against the LA Rams. Still, Buffalo, one of the contenders in the AFC. They look very good this year. 4, I have the Green Bay Packers, who continue to just lay it on to opponents. They lead the league in points and yards, looking very impressive so far. 3, I have the Baltimore Ravens, dropping them 2 spots from number 1. They just were completely uncompetitive with the Kansas City Chiefs on Monday Night Football. If not for a fumble midway through the third quarter by the Chiefs, that would have completely blown things wide open. This wouldn't have been a competitive game, and Baltimore really did not play up to their standard. 2, I have the Seattle Seahawks, who escaped the Dallas Cowboys in a shootout. Again, Russell Wilson just putting up enormous stats, it was really close between the Seahawks and the Ravens, but I just had to go with the Seahawks because they're undefeated. And then at number 1. No surprise. I mean, this team has really separated themselves. Last week, I said that the Seahawks, Chiefs, and Ravens were clearly the top 3 teams, and there was a big gap until number 4. Well, now there's a big gap between 1 and 2. The Chiefs look unbelievable. I mean, fill in any adjective you like. That performance against the Ravens was awe-inspiring. They played amazing football. So just, I guess, your guys' overall thoughts on the power rankings?
Much better than last week, Marko, for sure. I think Tennessee and Tampa Bay making into the top 10. I like to see that. San Francisco, get them out of the honorable mentions entirely. Come on, man. They beat the Giants. I'll give a little shout out to Nick Mullins for quarterbacking a good game, but they're pretty much over with. The Saints deserve to be dropped that far. My first major issue comes to the fact that I know I've been advocating for the Pittsburgh Steelers for a couple weeks now. Come on, Marko. They're 3-0. I don't know why you have them behind the Patriots. I don't get it. And to clear up any allegations of me kind of being prejudiced or something, I'm not a Patriots fan myself. I don't have some anti-Boston agenda. Several other actors I'm a big fan of. Sports, not so much. Matt Damon, sure. Sports, no. But come on, dude. Pittsburgh's much better than Patriots, especially on defense.
I will say this: the winner of the Steelers-Titans game will more than likely be above the Patriots,
and that's absolutely how it should be.
Especially considering they'll probably lose to the Chiefs. Not to look into the future. We're looking at the past here on power rankings. Paul, any issues you have?
First, I just like to point out the fact that all of the NFC West teams made these, and like I said, or like Will said, I don't know if I necessarily agree with the 49ers being in there as an honorable mention.
They are still, very competitive. I mean, they blew out the Giants, but I understand, yeah.
Believe it or not, Chicago Bears are 3-0. I think.
No.
Come on, a 3-0 team isn't in the top 14.
The Chicago Bears are 3 plays away from being an 0-3 team. They're the worst 3-0 team I've ever seen in any sport.
That is why the 49ers are an honorable mention. Just because I could not stomach putting the Chicago Bears, led by Nick Foles, at this point.
I think if they win next week, they have to be at least an honorable mention. But kind of going away from that, shout out to the Cleveland Browns for being over 500 for the first time since 2014.
That was impressive. That's an amazing stat, Paul. Let's put that up on the screen when we get to this. Cleveland Browns above 500 for the first time since 2014. I did think about putting them in the honorable mentions, but San Francisco, they haven't wronged me yet outside of a decent Cardinals team. The injuries will pile up and will be a problem eventually, but right now they're still playing good football even with the injuries.
And then I mentioned the NFC West doing so well so far this season. NFC East, holy smokes. 2-9-1 is their overall record, and the Washington football team is currently leading the division.
And the only reason one of those wins exists is because they had an interdivision game.
What a train wreck that is, but I'll let Will break down some more of the top 5.
I think Buffalo, once again, you've always got Buffalo in the right spot because they're very good and they keep getting better, but they're definitely behind Chiefs, Seahawks, Ravens, Packers.
I would have potentially put the Bills above the Packers if the the first half result of the Rams game would have held through the rest of the game, if they would have completely blown out the Rams, but it was super close. By the way, that's also the reason I left the Rams in honorable mentions.
Bills-Rams was absolutely the best football game I've watched this year for the NFL. Loved it.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be Ravens-Chiefs, like I said last week. I thought it was going to be amazingly competitive, high-scoring, crazy. But you're right, that ended up being the Bills and the Rams.
I agree with Kansas City and Seattle being 1 and 2. Generally, I agree with Baltimore Ravens at 3, Packers at 4, but I know my buddy Tim Seipel would like me to be outraged for this. I can't quite muster up some outrage for it, but I think the Packers have played well enough that I think they deserve a little more respect in the rankings.
I've consulted with 4 Packers fans this weekend.
Some market research.
And 3 of the 4 have said they need to be number 1 just based off their offensive production. I'm not going to be that.
Have they heard of Patrick Mahomes?
I'm not going to be quite that
or
biased.
Russell Wilson.
You mentioned it. Number 1 in yards, number 1 in points. This offense is for real, and they don't even have Devontae Adams right now.
Yeah, and some may contend that the reason the offense is number 1 is because they've had to stay on the field more because their defense has kept worse teams in closer games. And you could argue that Seattle and Kansas City have been more thorough in some of their victories. But, every team has struggled. Even the Chiefs almost lost to the Chargers. I think what is needed, and, the Cowboys almost beat the Seahawks. What really needs to be said is these rankings, despite my praise for the Chiefs, after that Ravens victory, these teams are still very close. Yeah, it's very competitive right now.
I wouldn't be I think that's a little biased when saying that the Packers would be number 1. I wouldn't go that high. I like the Chiefs and Seahawks at 1 and 2, but I would contend, I think they could potentially be that number 3 team. I think we need to go down a little bit further in the season just to really see If that was a fluke from the Ravens or if they're really not as good as they were last year, and if the Packers are seriously for real. But I think last week when you were saying like between the Bills and the Packers, we're kind of really hard to tell who was ahead. I think that has separated a little bit. The Bills struggled quite a bit against the Rams.
I
and the
do
Packers
agree, yeah.
completely, besides like one possession, I think they pretty much dismantled that Saints defense on Sunday.
Yeah, that was a very impressive victory. We'll see how the Saints bounce back. Again, they're the only 2-loss team in the power rankings, just considering the teams they've played and how high up they were. Even with good performances, they may slip lower and lower and even into the honorable mentions. And that's the thing, you want to wait till a team wins or loses a certain game to move them. But, like you guys said with like the Bills and the Packers, if the Packers had been below the Bills last week, I probably would have flipped them just based on the Packers' performance versus how the Bills played. It's kind of challenging if everyone keeps winning. But yeah, I think it's a pretty solid power rankings. Do you guys have any other issues you'd like to contend with?
No, not really. It looks pretty good aside from Patriots and potentially Packers. I like it.
Yeah, and again, those issues probably will get resolved within the next week, considering the games we have coming up. As we get further and further into the season, I think the definition between these kind of clusters of teams within the rankings will further define itself. All right, yeah, well, I guess that's it for our Week 4 NFL Power Rankings. Again, thank you guys so much for for watching and listening. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave your own unqualified opinions in the comment section down below. Again, I was joined by Will Byerman and Paul Hires. As always, I'm Marko Yerkovich. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next time.